Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the November edition of the Landlord Lens. It's the collaboration between Property Tribes, of which I'm the co-founder and also a full-time residential landlord, and the NRLA. And my co-host for this webinar is, of course, NRLA CEO, Mr. Ben Beadle, otherwise known as the busiest man in the private rented sector. How are you doing, Ben?
Which is why I'm a bit late today, sorry.
Yeah, well, we apologise to everybody for the slight technical difficulties, but here we go. Ben, there's so much to talk about, and so much has happened in the last sort of 48 hours as well in our sector that we can touch on before we start looking at the kind of trending topics that have been engaging the audience on Property Tribes. Now, first of all, I just want to roll back a little bit to the conference, because what an amazing day. Sold out, over 1,000 landlords. Mr. Michael Gove on the video link up, answering questions, looking landlords directly in the eyes. Amazing day, Ben. I bet you've had so much feedback, positive feedback.
Yeah, I mean, it far surpassed my expectations. It was a great day. It was excellent to get the issues across to the people that matter. Michael Gove, Clive Betts, chair of the Levelling Up Select Committee, but it was also a great event for our suppliers as well, and landlords being able to hear from the very best from their respective areas. It was spot on. It was lovely.
Well, congratulations to the whole team that pulled it off, because I was there and I thought it was absolutely awesome, and it really raised the bar and set a new standard of events for landlords. So already looking forward to the next one. Now, I guess your feet haven't really touched the ground since then, have they? You've been busy this morning. Tell us a little bit about what you've done this morning.
So yes, I was at Portcullis House giving evidence at the Renters Reform Bill Committee. And this committee, it works differently to, say, a select committee. It's considering particular elements of the bill and where we want to see amendments. So it's not about me rocking up and saying, don't abolish Section 21, don't do this, don't do that. Actually, it's very specific. It turned out not to be terribly specific, to be honest with you, but that's the purpose of these bills, and hopefully it won't surprise the listeners to know that we've made a full submission in terms of the amendments that we would like to see to the bill. And I was speaking to those things earlier, which again won't come as any surprise, but it's about making sure that landlords to benefit from a moratorium from tenants. It's about making sure that the antisocial provisions are not watered down further, that they can work for responsible landlords. It's also about making amends in relation to the student sector as far as we can. All of those types of things.
So a bit of fine tuning, really.
Yeah, I mean, change is coming. So, anybody that's out there that is disappointed, that we've not said we don't want to see the Renters Reform Bill, I'm afraid, whether the Blues bring it or whether the Reds bring it in a year's time, it is coming. And the forum today was made up of a very large committee of about 17 MPs, with a chair appointed by the Speaker of the House to consider the very finer points of the bill. And we had a session before me, but they're sitting all day hearing from different elements. And I've just finished with Dr. Julie Rugg here in our London office, who's going to give evidence this afternoon as well. So yeah, really, really interesting. And then that sort of closes, I think we're due to hear on the 5th or 6th of December. So there's a whole lot of horse trading to kind of go on. And again, we will be leveraging our influence with MPs and peers to make sure we get the amendments that we want. The difficulty is, so will others. And then I didn't feel there was a lot of consensus today, Vanessa. I very much like to find areas of commonality, but when you have Shelter and others calling for a 2-year moratorium during which landlords can't give a no fault notice, then you do recognise that we are some way apart on these things, which is a pity.
Indeed. Well, in the last, I don't know, 24 hours, we've had a new housing minister, Lee Rowley, who was housing minister very briefly when Liz Truss had her very short premiership. He, I believe I'm right in saying, is the 7th housing minister since 2020 and the 16th in over the last 13 years. So it really has been a revolving door of housing ministers. Wondered, Ben, have you had any interactions with Lee Rowley to this point? Have you got any thoughts about how he's going to operate?
Well, although he replaces McLean, what we don't know yet is whether PRS brief will sit. He wasn't at the committee hearing this morning. Gove wasn't there. The Levelling Up minister was there, and so what we have to wait and understand is although he is replacing McLean, where is the responsibility for the bill and the PRS going to sit? That could also move around. So at this stage, we don't know yet. Can I just say, though, Vanessa, I think it's absolutely appalling, frankly, that we've had this change. And it's no wonder that housing is in such a mess when it's treated so much as a political football. You know, whether or not the minister was up to scratch will be for others to judge. What I can tell you is I met her on a number of occasions. I found her to be on her brief and on the money. And of course, you know, you don't agree on everything. But she certainly understood the issues that we were raising. And that's why we have seen, you know, success. I say success. We've certainly seen the Secretary of State come out and announce that Section 21 won't be abolished until such time the courts are ready to receive such cases. Now, that's slightly vague and wishy-washy, but it's a helpful intervention, I think, and a recognition that, you know, that landlords are being listened to. So I mean, you know, I can't honestly see how anybody can get to grips with a brief as wide as housing in such a short space of time. And as I posted on social media yesterday, we enjoyed good engagement with Rachel. She was a nice lady. She understood the issue. She understood the sector. She put her kids through uni. She knew the student market. She knew what we were talking about. You know, she had a genuine interest in housing and planning. I cannot see for the life of me why you would chop her the day before such a significant event of the committee that we've had today. Clearly, there are other issues at play here, but it's really unhelpful. Really unhelpful.
No, I agree. There's just been no continuity for so many years, and as you say, it is a very wide brief, and a new person that comes into the role has so much information to assimilate to even start to begin to get their thinking straight about how they want to work in the sector. It's just a nightmare to have that complete lack of continuity and at such a critical time in our sector. So I guess with Lee Rowley, it's going to be watch this space. We don't even know how long he'll be there.
Well, yeah, indeed. If we're going for an election next year, I suspect he's not going to be there terribly long. But he, you know, as you say, he did have a similar post before, although he wasn't responsible for the PRS brief. So once we ascertain exactly where the private rented sector is to sit, we will start making some inroads. I have met him a couple of times. Seems like a nice chap, but yeah, we'll see what happens. But you know, listeners can appreciate, hopefully, that, you know, we will be like the proverbial rat up a drain pipe once that is announced, so that we can make the best impression that we can on behalf of landlords and the sector.
It must be just so frustrating because you invest time in building a rapport and a relationship with each minister, and then they're gone and you have to start from scratch. So I'm sure it must be very frustrating to have to do that. We're just going to jump back to your work this morning at the committee. Alex Schinder says, Ben, you seem to say this morning you were happy with the proposals, which seem to require a high level of evidence if a judge has to decide. Alex wondered if you could elaborate on that.
Well, I'm happy with what has been set out in terms of the antisocial behaviour provisions, and I should say that Gove and the Prime Minister have accepted a number of points when it comes to antisocial behaviour. The bit that we like is that the test has been widened. So what's written at the moment is not what we're going to end up with. We're expecting some amendments actually later today. I should have told you, Vanessa, before coming on, but there will be I'm probably giving too much away now, but there are some amendments coming later today / tomorrow that deal with this. And my point here is, and we're getting a lot of pushback when it comes to antisocial behaviour. If you watch the session with Shelter and Citizens Advice, they were very concerned about that wording. Well, we have to have a wider wording threshold, call it what you will, that's easier to prove antisocial behaviour and gives judges the latitude to make that sort of decision. Is it perfect? Is it going to be as easy as Section 21? I'm afraid it's not going to be. But I made the point earlier that we have to be in the position of where we are on the side of the victims of antisocial behaviour and not left with the perpetrators in the property. Whether or not this will work as intended, I cannot be 100% sure. But with the amendment that is coming, it's certainly better than we could have hoped for. The challenge for us is to make sure that it doesn't get watered down any further and that test becomes impossible to prove. That's what I want to avoid.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Well, let's move on now to the first of our trending topics. And if you're new to this webinar and the format of it, this is where Ben and I briefly discuss the topics that have been trending on property tribes. It's very similar to how Twitter comes up with trending topics. We have a little algorithm that sorts everything in the background and creates an updated trending list about every 3 hours or so. And it's a very good barometer of what's on landlords' minds. And when Ben and I first came up with the format of this webinar, we thought that it would be a really good way to make what we're talking about very current and relevant because it's of the moment. And Ben, I'm afraid that one of the issues is the furore that's been going on in the tax planning sector over the last few weeks. Obviously, I think everybody's aware now that HMRC have issued a spotlight against the hybrid method of tax planning, which was being undertaken by a company that the NRLA had an association with. And Ben, I think with all these tax planning schemes, of which there are several, they're so complex, it's very hard for landlords to know where they stand. And our attitude at Property Tribes was to allow discussion about them, to tease out the issues about them. But ultimately, unless HMRC lay down the law about them, you just don't know. And even then, if it goes to court, HMR can be overturned by a judge. So landlords have been following these schemes since 2015 when Section 24 first came in. Why has HMRC waited 8 years to, come up with this verdict? It's been a very difficult time for landlords with all these exposés of tax planning schemes that Dan Needle at Tax Policy Associates has also been undertaking. What's your take on that?
Well, you know, my take on this is that we all want to pay our fair share, but we also want to pay as little as we reasonably can within the confines of the law, right? So, but this has become far more pronounced. It's become far more pronounced because of things like Section 24, that's forcing landlords to, you know, either reconsider their investments or to move sector or to incorporate. And you know, it's why I referenced earlier that the Renters Reform Bill Committee, that actually the Reform Bill will do nothing substantive to help supply and the problems around supply, like taxation. And so, you know, in some respects, it's very much an unintended consequence of landlords revisiting their business plans. And ultimately, you know, much like how you know, laws get tested about whether, you know, notice has been served correctly or not, it's the same, exactly the same in this type of scenario as well. And I think that, you know, everybody has done their due diligence here, but clearly, you know, HMRC have taken a slightly different tact.
They have, and in the last, I think, 24 hours, letters have gone out to landlords that have entered into a hybrid tax planning arrangement, inviting them to come clean with HMRC and pay the tax that they owe, hopefully with reduced penalties and interest, because it's the kind of HMRC can offer a kind of amnesty situation. It's just, I just can't fathom, Ben, why it's taken them so long to have a ruling on this. Landlords have so much uncertainty, as you've said. We're being hammered by Section 24. Some of these schemes appeared very credible. You know, I think landlords are caught in the middle of all this, to be honest.
Yes, they are. They absolutely are. And, you know, it is really unfortunate. We are where we are. But, you know, it is very, very regrettable, I think, that that it has taken a while to you know, to come around to this way of thinking. And I think that certainly the firms that are involved have been very rigorous and confident in what they are offering, and including, you know, a number of cases that have been through
Mm.
you know, assessments by HMRC on the very model that HMRC are now questioning. You know, rules change. I get that, but I absolutely share those people's frustrations that are maybe caught up in it.
Indeed. Let's move on to our second topic then. And this was a sort of mini poll by one of our members. And it was asking, will you be a landlord in 5 years' time? And she was interested to know which part of the country you were in, and if you were staying in buy-to-let, which part of the country you were in, and what your intentions were for the future. And I think this is a question that a lot of landlords are actually asking themselves at this moment in time. Many of us have been in the game for a long time and may have been thinking about retiring in maybe 10 years. And we've brought that kind of event horizon forward and thinking, actually, maybe I've had enough. Maybe I am going to start selling up. So it is a universal question for a lot of landlords, just because of all the pressures that we're facing. Ben, have you ever thought about answering that question? Will you be a landlord in 5 years' time?
I will be. Whether I'll have the same number of properties, I don't know. I sold a studio flat a couple of years ago, just because, not because of any other reason other than it was a bit of a pain to manage, and it wasn't giving me a great return, to be honest with you. So I got shot of it. But that was a decision that I took, like everybody else would take. It was well before, you know, interest rates went up so significantly. But you know, I've got I mean, I've got one eye on the student changes, to be honest with you, and how that will affect. As you know, I've got 3 or 4 properties in the student market in West London, and you know, the changes that are coming down the track without amendment will cause it to not work. And I've been very clear about the impact that it will have on the student sector. But I've also got other, you know, properties that are let out to different cohorts of people. And I'm not too worried about the wider changes. What I am worried about is tax and mortgages. I've got 2 that are coming off of fixed terms, one at the end of this month, one in February, and you know, it's making it stack up, particularly against the backdrop of taxation. I'm not an incorporated landlord, so I suffer like everybody else at the hands of Section 24, and so, you know, I will make my assessment like everybody else will, in terms of, is it a going concern? And I think there are a lot of people that are looking at their investments and weighing it up, and you know, it depends what you're there for as well, though, Vanessa, doesn't it? You know, if you're looking at capital appreciation, well, you know, you may not be too bothered about it, but actually, if you're looking at the sort of monthly return and weighing up a mortgage, you might think differently. That said, you know, I still believe that property is a good investment, and I get that, you know, there's people that are browbeaten out there. If you've been in the property sector for 30 years, I can well see you looking at these changes and thinking, can't hack it. And you know, that's your choice. For me, it's a simple question of economics. I'm not going to invest in something that I don't turn a modicum of profit on. And as I've said on this webinar before, you know, that's not an offensive word. You know, we have to be really realistic about why people invest in housing. Yes, there's some accidental landlords out there, I get that, but the vast majority of people do it for their retirement, for their pension, for their children, and they still have very much a role in this sector. Whether the Blues or the Reds like landlords is irrelevant. They need landlords. And so, you know, even with the opposition, and we were running a fringe event with Labour, you know, they are begrudgingly accepting that they do need landlords. And, you know, and unless they put their money in their hands in their pockets and come up with the goods around social housing and investment, we're still be in exactly the same position. And arguably, you could argue that, you know, rents are at a 10-year high. Actually, maybe the returns are getting better for some people.
Well, mortgage rates are at last, thankfully, starting to come down. We're seeing some 5% buy-to-let mortgages now, and rents continue to rise because of the supply-demand imbalance. And you know, we've had recent reports in the last 2 or 3 days that rents are set to continue to rise into 2024. So I'm very much minded the same as you, Ben. And to be honest, I'm taking literally each day as it comes now. I've managed to actually have a couple of rent increases this month, which does help. But, you know, it's that uncertainty, certainly for a change of government, is very concerning. And sometimes, if you're not sure, it's best to just sit quietly and see what develops. But I think having the kind of conversations that we've had on Property Tribes around this issue, it's very interesting to hear other people's point of view and how they're thinking, and it may help you develop your own way forwards that works for you. So I think this is another reason why Ben and I are very keen for people to interact together as landlords and get feedback and talk to each other, because it can really help you navigate your way through our sector, which is very challenging for all of us at the moment. Going back to the tax issue, Michael Thomas has said which companies should be avoided for tax planning. Well, we won't mention company names, Michael, because it's not the actual company, it's the method that is being recommended. And the method that we are talking about, that HMRC has come out with what's called a spotlight on, is the hybrid method of tax planning. And there's lots about it on Property Tribes. Just put hybrid into the search engine and you'll be able to read all the discussions. So yeah, I think it's we're coming to the end of the year now as well. People are kind of winding down for Christmas. Maybe we should just see what 2024 holds. That will be my, goodness knows what, yeah, that'll be my 20th year as a portfolio landlord. Okay, this is a good one, Ben. The two oh, I've had a mental block what their names are. The two chaps at Property Hub, they've done a podcast recently, and they have been talking about property strategies that no longer work. And they came up with the following: lease options, aggressive refinancing, buy to sell, otherwise known as flipping, and developing. And they said two strategies past their prime are HMOs and holiday lets. And they are of the belief that the only evergreen strategies that are working at the moment are buy and hold for the long term and adding value. Just wondered what you thought of their list. And I just wanted to actually say I would add rent to rent to non-viable strategies, not because of how it works, but the fact is that tenant demand is so incredibly strong. Why do you need to go to a subletting tenant? You can have your own tenants and you'll have a very wide choice of tenants. In fact, I'm just putting another property in Highbury in Islington on the market for rent, and I've been told by the agent it should let within 48 hours because there's such massive demand. So strategies, Ben, what's your kind of takeaway on those? The two Robs at Property Hub, that's it.
Yes,
sorry guys, I should remember.
I was just going to jump in, but yes, the two Robs. It's funny. Certainly the hold for the long term is one that I have always gone by, to be honest with you. Yeah, I'm vanilla. You know, there's nothing exciting about, you know, my type of investments. Not a euphemism, but you know, I do have properties in the HMO sector, as I've said, and I've never thought about. I have added value to them. I've gone up, I've gone out, I've made more rooms. So that's certainly a strategy that's worked for me. But I've always considered things over the longer term. I'm probably not brave enough to do some of the things that others have done in terms of, you know, buying at auction and flipping very quickly and that sort of thing. That doesn't appeal to me. But certainly I would endorse the stick for the long term strategy, because what I do hope, and I said this about COVID, and you know, now we're in a slightly different era now, what I do hope is that with the sort of demand that we're seeing, that actually if you look at some of these things and the uncertainties and the ups and downs and so forth, that's much more easily rectifiable over the longer term. It feels pretty crap, you know, at the time that it happens, and there's a lot of worry, and we're in that time at the moment. And my job is not to scaremonger, it's to, you know, is to influence and make sure that we're here for the longer term. But actually, if you do look at things over the longer term, I think the impact of them will be less, and that's why I would absolutely endorse that that approach.
I think risks are very significantly amplified in the current market conditions, and some of those strategies are much higher risk. I mean, lease options, I don't regard it as a strategy to be used in residential property at all, to be honest. You know, it's not something that I would ever consider. I'm very like you, Ben. I'm very low risk. and I stick to what I know, and I take a very long-term view, and I think that's the safest way to move forwards. We've got a comment here from Patricia. She says she's not incorporated and she's been selling properties over the last five years. She's now reduced to half the number and she's got no mortgages. Yes, I'm sure that's going to work better for you, Patricia. You're in a very safe and stable situation, in my opinion. So well done for getting yourself in that position. We've got
and that sort of rationalization, Vanessa, I think is something that people are thinking about. I think people are, you know, I recognize that very much as a strategy, which is, you know, sort of paying things down, rationalizing the portfolio, and getting to that sort of position where you're less reliant on some of these external factors like interest rates and mortgages and all of that sort of jazz. So yeah,
yes. Rationalization, that's a good strategy. Anonymous attendee, in terms of the hybrid model and the Spotlight 63, do you think it's game over despite all the discussions and the appointment of a KC? I'm sorry to say, I believe it is game over for the hybrid model now. I think now that HMRC are actually contacting individual landlords and inviting them to, you know, come into a dialogue with them, I do think the writing's on the wall. Any thoughts on that one, Ben?
Yeah, I think it probably is on the wall. I'd be very interested to see, in light of the cases that have passed muster with HMRC before, and if these ones that are being pulled in now don't, I'd be very interested just to sort of understand, you know, the difference and the rationale that they are adopting. But it does feel like the writing is on the wall for sure.
And obviously we've had Dan Liddell do his scrutinization of some of these schemes as well, and he may well have you know, brought them to the attention of HMRC. We don't really know, but we do know that HMRC do frequent events and go on forums and Facebook and things like that and see what landlords are talking about. So if there is anything going on that's going to be of interest to them, it will, you know, come onto their radar at some point. So, you know, do bear that in mind. We've got one final quick trending topic. My tenant is not allowing access for maintenance. This is a bit of a landlord FAQ, isn't it, Ben? Because it does happen a lot. My personal feeling is when a tenant doesn't allow maintenance, it's a bit of a red flag. They may have a legitimate reason that they don't want somebody coming into the property. They could be a shift worker, they could have a new baby, something like that. But then there could be some rather more illegitimate reasons, such as they could be subletting, they could have an unauthorized pet, they could be a hoarder. But, you know, when a tenant won't allow access, there's actually not many things that landlords can do. And the kind of general consensus of opinion is that it's probably best to serve notice. I don't know if you have a view on that.
Yeah, well, I've just been, as I said, talking to Dr. Julie Rugg for one of her latest research pieces, which is about criminality in the private rented sector on both sides. And this absolutely is a red flag for me. I'd want to know, you know, why access is being refused, particularly for something like maintenance. Sounds a bit dodgy to me. And perhaps before you serve notice, trying to get to the bottom of that.
Of course,
and making it clear that, you know, if you can't get in to be able to do whatever it is that's needed, you know, you're going to have no option but to give notice, and it's a route that you don't want to go down. But I need to get in, and I want to accompany whoever's going in, actually, because I'd want to I want to satisfy myself that there wasn't anything kind of, it's not turned into a knocking shop or a drugs den, which is often, well, not often, but certainly one of the things talking to Julie about is something that people prevent others from going in because of what's inside. So I would definitely ask a few more questions and make it clear that you mean business, in terms of notice being the ultimate sanction if you can't resolve it informally.
Agreed. Okay, well, those are our sort of main trending topics of this Landlord Lens webinar. We've got about another 5 minutes, so I'd like to invite everybody, if they've got any questions, to pop them into the Q&A, and Ben and I can just answer a couple now. Let's see.
There's one here, Vanessa, about asking us why we think landlords are so poorly thought of, which I thought was an interesting one. Well, do you know what? I don't know if people saw Michael Gove at the Dispatch Box recently, but he was at pains to recognise that the vast majority of landlords do an excellent job. Those were pretty much his words. It's a great pity he hasn't been able to say those things earlier than more recently, but there we go. I do think a lot of people have a bad story to tell about their experience in the private rented sector, and this, folks, is one of the the difficulties when it comes to reform. That we look through the issues in a particular way, and from our perspective we see really good landlords that are looking after their tenants, that are doing the right thing, that are treating people fairly and all of that sort of stuff and keeping up with the law. But I have to acknowledge there is a part of our sector that brings it into disrepute, and that's that's Shelter and others that are highlighting that sort of sharp practice that frankly does us no favors, to be honest with you. And that's why we do call for things like robust enforcement, because actually flushing out bad landlords from the sector is helpful for everybody, but it cannot be done to the detriment of those that are doing a really, really good job. And that message is getting through, because I see things like the property portal, Vanessa, that's going to be brought in. There's a really positive way of landlords being able to show that they are compliant, a fit and proper person, and all of that sort of stuff. But at the same time, what it will allow local authorities to do is to really target their enforcement away from the good guys and girls, and more readily using the data sources that are there to identify the bad ones. So I think as a group, I don't think we've helped ourselves so much, but now is the time to separate those two groups and pull away and make the point that there are two groups of landlords out there, and we're the good guys, and we can help government achieve its ambitions and provide decent and safe accommodation.
Well, I would like to sort of play devil's advocate a little bit, because there was a story in the paper, I think it was yesterday or the day before. It was a single mum with 3 children, 2 grandchildren, and 3 chihuahuas living in a house that was damp and moldy. And the pictures of the property were very, very concerning, the level of damp and mold in there. And of course, the media is looking for clicks, they're looking for attention, and a story saying I'm living in a lovely, comfortable, warm home provided by a responsible landlord isn't going to be very interesting. So they're always going to go for the most extreme case. And this was certainly an extreme case. But the other side of the story was that the landlord said that the tenant had been refusing access to deal with the damp and mold. So I think there's always 2 sides to every story. And unfortunately, the media will often just focus on the tenant side of the story and not actually bring in various different processes that may have gone on where the landlord was trying to be responsible. So yeah, I think the media are looking for clicks. They want the most extreme stories they can find. They get a lot of people thumping their chests, quite rightly, if we hear these terrible stories of damp and mold and, you know, retaliatory evictions, which are actually illegal and shouldn't be allowed to happen, but, you know, it still does. And unfortunately, it does paint us in a bad light. The other thing I was going to say, Ben, was you know, my old hobby horse, and forgive me everybody, but we do have these wealth creation gurus who are all over social media saying you'll be a millionaire in a year with no money, and you'll be driving you know, a Ferrari like I am, and you'll be living in a mansion, and you'll be going on a world cruise and all this kind of thing. They actually nothing to do with our sector at all. They're what I call the wealth creation industry. Unfortunately, people outside of our sector don't realize and think they're just wealthy landlords who are taking advantage of tenants, and they give us a very bad reputation with the media, and quite a few media have picked up on some of these wealth creation gurus and talked about them as if they're landlords, and it's very unfortunate that they can't see the distinction. Anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, Vanessa, and I think that yeah, you know, they're not landlords, and it's the same with other characterizations of individuals. You know, talking to Julie earlier, I was making the point that, you know, she was talking about criminality and criminal landlords. At the end of the day, just criminals, you know, who just so happen to be, you know, using property and or renters as a means to execute their criminality. It's as simple as that. We just have to get the right categorization, I think.
Yes, I think we do. Leslie Hall says, why can't Shelter understand that rogue landlords don't comply with existing legislation and they won't comply with new legislation? She says it's so frustrating because it's the good landlords that will leave and will be left with a higher proportion of rogue or criminal landlords.
Well, I mean, simply put, it's not in their interest to. And you know, you take the hearing this morning. You know, we're in the middle of a housing crisis. We have a desperate shortage of properties, and actually, what does Shelter want? Well, what they want is the time frame for reletting a property. So if you do give somebody notice to sell or for your family to move back in, if you then subsequently don't do it, they want that increased from a 3-month window where you mustn't do it to a year. And, you know, and I pointed this out at the select committee earlier in the year. Is this right that a homelessness charity is saying that, in as well as there being a 30 grand fine, by the way, for doing it, a very significant fine, that tenants will be better off by having that property empty for a year than having a place to live? I mean, madness. Madness.
Indeed. Well, we've got one final question. John Beaumont, he says, hi, Vanessa, we met briefly at the NRLA conference. We did indeed. Hello, John. He raised a point with me about pets in HMOs. And I thought this was such an interesting question. If we have a default position for pets, what's going to happen with HMOs? Because you could have a kitten in one room and then you could have a Rottweiler dog in the room next door. What is going to happen, Ben, do you think, in terms of pet legislation for HMOs?
No, I think it would be pragmatic. I don't think it would differentiate between HMOs, but the briefing, I don't think pets didn't come up specifically at the hearing this morning, John. But in my written submission, and I'm looking at it now, I raised the issues of, not specifically in HMOs, but where you've got more than one interest. So if you've got, you know, 2 or 3 tenants, whose rights prevail? You know, so if you've got somebody that wants a pet and somebody that doesn't want a pet, I normally adopt the approach that as long as everybody's happy in the HMO, and I'm granting permission for one pet, one specific pet, not a blanket menagerie or zoo of creatures. And again, I've asked for that to be tightened up in the wording of the bill too. Whose rights does prevail? Honestly, I still fail to get too excited about this, because I'm very much of the view that landlords know what's best for their properties and will take sensible and practical steps to manage this. And that's why the guidance that needs to accompany this needs to spell this out. And that's what I've said to the committee in written evidence ahead of my appearance this morning. So sit tight, we've got this, watch this space.
Well, I think you've just highlighted there that the devil is so in the detail, and a lot of these headlines, once you start to dig down and get into the nuances of them, you realize that they're just totally impractical in certain niche areas, as with the pets issue. And it's so good that you're there, Ben, digging down on this detail and pointing out where there are what are actually flaws in potential new legislation. We'll have one more quick question. I don't know if you know the answer to this. It's a pet question. Tracy Sidaway. She has a tenant that has an XL bully dog. Does she need to get proof from them that they've registered the dog with the new dangerous dogs exemption scheme?
It's a very good question. I don't know what the official position, I'll be honest, is, but as a responsible landlord, given that you know that that dog is in the property and you know that the law, I don't know whether it has changed or is going to be legislated for, I think you'd want to take some reasonable steps to make sure that your renters are complying with it. I think that would be a good thing to do regardless.
Well, that's the sort of question that's ideal for the NRLA landlord helpline, which I call it phone a friend for landlords, and they're open, I think, from 9 to 5 and also on Saturday morning. And if you've got any questions that you need an answer to, that's one very quick and easy way to jump on the phone and speak to one of the reps on the end of the line. And Ben, you know, I've been up to your head offices in Sale and heard these guys in action, and there really isn't a question out there that that they've never had to answer. They're just absolute mines of information, aren't they?
Well, it's certainly an area that we have invested in, Vanessa, significantly. I mean, you know, without being too geeky about it, we're getting somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 calls a week. You know, it's a significant part of what we offer. And, you know, for the 85 quid membership, I'd say it was pretty good. I've got 33 call handlers, 3 team leaders. It's a big area for us, and it's about making sure that our members are supported and know that they're not going to wait forever and a day for someone to pick up the phone. They're going to speak to somebody that knows, and if they don't know there and then, we've got a specialist team in the background that supports them as well. So for those that aren't a member, I mean, seriously, get involved, please join up, and yeah, I hope if you are a member, you're enjoying membership.
Fantastic. Well, Ben, I'm not sure. Are we going to do another Landlord Lens this year? I think we were vaguely talking about doing one in early December to kind of review the year.
So,
and maybe look forward.
it's only in 2 weeks' time,
I know,
December. You
that's
realise
so
this?
scary.
Oh God, dear, oh dear, I can't believe it. We should try and fit something in before Christmas and wear a Christmas hat, I think, and have a little bit of a roundup. And I've certainly got other meetings to sort of report back on. The reason I was late today is I was meeting with the Master of the Rolls office about court reform and digitalisation, and trying to have a bit of a pincer movement on how we can influence the agenda from the judicial perspective as well. But there's lots of things that we're doing in the run up to Christmas, and you know, we'll come back in the new year reinvigorated and ready to fight the good fight. So yeah, let's get something in the diary.
Awesome. Well, thank you to everybody who has joined us today on the November edition of the Landlord Lens. Thank you for all your questions and your interaction. We really do appreciate it. And Ben and I will hopefully be back in December with a kind of roundup of the year and what landlords can look forward to in 2024. I can't believe how quickly it's coming around. But for today, it's goodbye from myself and goodbye from Ben. And thank you very much for being with us on the webinar this afternoon. And we'll see you next time.
Take care, folks.
Thank you both.